Hey guys, this is Mitch with FinePoint CGI, and today we're going to continue our Steam integration tutorial series where we finally get our data to go across to the rest of our clients. And we're going to be doing this by actually creating a small chat box for our users to be able to chat with each other. So we're going to go through the process of creating our socket servers. We are going to go and actually set up our connections. We're going to do some error handling as per usual, and we're going to actually build out our chat box. And finally, we're going to broadcast our data and set up our data parsing system. So that's what I have in store for you guys today. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, did you guys get some good coffee? I hope so. So first, we have to create a socket server. And a socket server is basically like the server that does the communication between all of our different players. So think of it kind of like a star pattern, right? All the players need to talk to us, and then we need to relay that data back. And that's what a socket server does. So if we come to our Steam manager here, creating a socket server is actually really easy. When we create our lobby, we can just create a socket server. So we can come in to our Steam manager and we can just create a function that creates a socket server. So let's just kind of come down to the bottom and type public void create Steam socket server. Now, Steam has a built-in way to create a socket server. So it's actually pretty simple. What we can do is say var Steam socket manager is equal to Steam networking sockets dot create, and you can see we have a bunch of different types of sockets. So we have a normal socket and a relay socket, okay? And a normal socket is when we want to talk to a server, and a relay socket is when we want to relay data between multiple people. Now, since this is a server, we're going to want to relay data. So let's grab relay socket like that. Now we have to tell it what type we want it to be. In our case, we'll want it to be a Steam socket manager like that. And we need to pass in if we want a virtual port or not. And in our case, I'm just going to pass in a 0. We don't need any of that. Now, when a host creates its socket manager, we actually need to also connect to that relay. And that's because we, as a server, also need to be a client to our own socket server, if that makes sense. So basically, we need to make sure that we get the information too, right? We don't want everyone else to get the information, but not us. So we'll say var Steam connection manager is equal to Steam networking sockets dot connect. And you'll see we have a couple options. We have connect normal and connect relay. In our case, we're going to do connect relay. That's what we need to do, what we need to use. And we need to choose the type, and that's the type of the socket server that we want. Now, in our case, we have built one, right? Just like how we built our own Steam socket manager, we did one for a Steam connection manager. So we'll type Steam connection manager, and we need to pass in some things. So you'll see we have a Steam ID, which is our server ID. So we actually have a server ID, which happens to be our Steam ID, right? Because we're the host, so it's using our Steam ID to create the server. So we'll type player Steam ID, and that will basically create our socket server. Now, when you do your connections for socket servers, normally in most applications, you have to pass in an IP address. But with Steam, you don't have to do that. You just pass in an ID of the player that's hosting the socket server. Or if you're doing a hosted server, it would be the server's ID as well. So it could be one or the other depending on what type of connection you're trying to do. Now I'm going to put in a small gd.perl print, and I'm just going to say we created our socket server. Just like that. Now, we also need to be able to join a socket server, okay? And we need to be really cautious when we join our socket server because we want to make sure that we're not host. So let's create a function, public void join Steam socket server. And we need to pass in a Steam ID, which will be the host. And we need to actually do a double check right now. One of the big things that I ran into when I was doing a lot of testing was that sometimes you would call join Steam socket server. And as a matter of fact, our code is going to do this where you are going to join your own socket server if you're not host. And it was just easier to organize the code to just make sure that we check if we're host. So let's come up to the top. Let's create a Boolean. Public bool is host, like that. And of course, it's going to default to false, so that works. And we'll come down here and we'll just say if not is host, then let's join our socket server. So gd.print joining socket server. And for us to join a socket server, we just need to call a very simple function call, which is var Steam connection manager is equal to Steam networking sockets dot connect relay Steam connection manager host comma and 0. And that's all we need to do to connect to our socket server. So Steam makes it really, really easy. Now, something that we should do is we should abstract these guys out to class-wide variables. So let's do that real quick because we might need this outside of our functions here. So let's pull these guys out. Let's just scroll up to the top and say public. If I remember correctly, the type is Steam Connection Manager. And I believe I called it Steam Connection Manager. Or I might have called it just Connection Manager, Steam Socket Manager. So we'll grab this guy and paste it up here. And then we're going to grab this guy, which is the Steam Connection Manager, and do the same thing. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's probably a good idea to abstract this out. So we'll pull that out and we'll pull out our Steam Connection Manager. There we go. Now, if we come down here, we can just get rid of these little vars, and that will help with just making things a little bit better and a little bit more clean. Now, you can see here, it cannot implicitly convert type from Steam Socket Manager to Steam Connection Manager. Let me take a look. That's my fault. We'll do Steam Socket Manager, and that should do it for us. Okay, so we have our create Steam socket server and our join Steam socket server, okay? And for us to create a socket server, we should create a Steam socket server when we create our lobby. Now, you don't have to do that necessarily, but if you want to pass packets between each other, the lobby system does have a very basic messaging system that's built into it. But really, if you want to do proper communication, you should just create your socket server and create your connection. So we'll just come up here to when we create our lobby, which if I can find it, I think it's the callback when we create our lobby. I know there has to be a callback for this. Did I not call for it? Let me see. On lobby created. Yep, there it is. So we'll fetch that down. Here we go. And when we create our lobby, we need to create our socket server. So we'll hit enter and call our function. So we'll type create Steam socket server, and that will actually create our socket server. Now, when we want to join a socket server, that's when we enter our lobby, right? When we have entered our lobby, we will go ahead and connect to our socket server. So down here, we can just type join socket server. There we go, join Steam socket server, and we're pretty much good to go. Now we do need to pass in an ID. Thankfully, we have our lobby object. So we can type lobby.owner.id, and that will pass back our Steam owner, or our lobby owner's ID, so we can connect our sockets up. Now we need to be able to read our data when it comes in. So to do that, we have to check to see if any additional data is in our queue. So the way that this all kind of works is you pass out your data and you say, hey, Steam, here's my data. And then Steam holds onto that data in a queue. And you have to basically check to see if new data has come in, and then you can pull that data down. Or at least that's kind of how I understand it. I know that it might be a little bit more nuanced or a little bit more funky than that, but from what I understand, that's kind of how it works. So to actually pull back our data, we need to check and receive that data in, if that makes sense. So we'll come up to our process, which might be actually down. There it is. We have our process right here, and we need to actually check to see if there's data. So first, we're going to wrap this in a try catch to just say, hey, if an exception should happen, we're good to go, right? And it won't crash our game. Then we need to check to see if we have a socket open. So if Steam socket manager does not equal null, then we can go ahead and do our code. And now we have to actually receive our data. So we can say Steam socket manager dot receive, and that will basically pull back our data. Okay. And next we need to basically check our connection manager as well for data. Okay. And the reason why we have to do both is because one is for the server and one is for the actual client. And that's why we're checking for null here, is because if we have a server and we don't have a client, then we don't want to necessarily pull back our connection manager data. Instead, we want to pull back our socket manager data. And vice versa, if we're doing a client, we don't have a Steam socket manager, but we do have a connection manager. So we have to make sure we check for both. So if Steam connection manager does not equal null, and we need to make sure that we're connected to our server. So we can say Steam connection manager dot connected, then we can actually do our receive. So Steam connection manager dot receive. And there we go. So that basically is how we're going to get back our data. When we fire off our data, we basically are checking for that data, if that makes sense. Now here we can go ahead and just print our error. So we'll type gd.print error receiving data, and we will pass in our error. So e.message. There we go. Now we need to send data, and this is where things can get kind of funky. And I'm not going to go into too much depth, but basically all we need to do is we need to create a button that can fire off this data, and then we can verify that we have communication. Now, if we head back to Godot here, and we go to our lobby button, and we go to our button down, and we connect that, and copy it, and connect it to our control node here. Let's connect that guy, and we can come down here and just say private void on lobby button down, and then we can basically just fire off our data to our socket manager. Now this is only going to work one way. We're only going to connect our client to our server and fire data from our client to our server. And the reason why is because we're going to have to do some funky relaying stuff, and I don't want to get into that just yet, but I do want to get this communication working. So how we can do that is we can actually fire off, using our connection manager, a send message. So in here, let's type Steam manager dot Steam connection manager dot connection dot, and you can see we have the option of send message. Now there's a lot of overloads here, and the one we're going to be using is string, but know that there are other options here. There's an inner pointer one for if you need inner pointer data. There's a byte array one for if you're sending byte data. And of course, there's another one for byte data, but one has the send type and one has an offset and length. And then finally, there's one for strings. Now, the one we're going to be using right now is for strings, but know that this exists because it's important. So if we hit quote, we'll just pass in test. Now, on the flip side of all of this, we're going to need to take that data, parse it, and print out the results. Now, you might be asking, okay, but Mitch, where are we going to be processing this data? And in the future, we're going to create a little class that abstracts some of this, makes it a little bit, more verbose and a little bit easier to use. But in our case, let's just head over to our socket manager, which I think I have up here. There we are. We can come down here and we have this event called onMessage. And onMessage actually receives all of our data. So this event, this little guy here, gets called whenever data comes in through your socket server. Now this is for socket servers. That's actually for the server, not for the client. That's where the connection manager onMessage comes in. That's what this one's used for. So that's something to keep in mind, is that there are two different functions that pull data in that are named the same thing that do different things. So just keep that in mind. Now, if we head over to our socket manager, we need to read that data. Okay. And this is where things are going to get a bit complicated. Okay. Since we need to parse that data, it's going to come in as an inter pointer. Okay. And an inter pointer is basically arbitrary data. And we need to actually do what's called marshalling that data. And marshalling data is basically converting it to something that we can use. So if we come over here and we create a byte array, okay, and a byte array is just an array of hexadecimal values, and we'll say managed array, okay, and that's equal to a new byte array like that. And we have to specify a size. And the beauty of this system is this little int size is the actual size of our data stream. So we can type size, simple enough. And now we need to copy that data from our inner pointer data into our managed array. So we can type marshal dot copy. And you will notice that we don't have auto completion. So if we click on this guy and click on this guy, we can do using system.runtime.interop and put that in. Now, the really cool thing about system.runtime.interop services is this is how C# can talk to C++, is actually by marshalling data and by using the system.runtime.interop services. So check it out, like read the code there and read a lot of the documentation there, and you'll understand Godot on a whole nother level. But in our case, we don't really care about any of that, right? So we're just trying to copy some data into an array, right? So first parameter is data, and then the second parameter is the destination data, so managed array. And then we need to pass in what index we're starting at, in this case 0, and the length is size, okay? Now I know that that's a lot of information, okay? But basically what we're doing is we're passing in our data from our inner pointer data. We're passing in our destination data, which is the managed array. We are saying that we start at our first index of our inner pointer data, and then we read through until our last index, which in this case is size, okay? And that's basically how you can copy data from an inner pointer to a byte array. Now, if you have any questions, hit me up in the comments and I can try to write up something a bit more fancy to explain it, but that's basically how I understand it. Now, we need to convert this to string, okay? And the easiest way to convert this to string is by using system.text encoding. Okay, and we can come in here and just go var string is equal to, actually, I don't think string will work. str is equal to system.text.encoder encoding.default.getString. And what this will do is it's going to take that byte data and it's going to attempt to process it into a string. And we'll just pass in our managed array. And now we can say got a socket message :space plus str. And that hopefully will give us our data. Now, if we've done everything correctly, we should be able to get and receive data. Now we just have to send our data. And I think we already did that, but I'm going to double check because I just lost my train of thought. So let me see. Yes, we are sending data. Okay, so if we save this and I copy this data over to my other machine, I will be right back with both of these guys running and we can test it and see how it works. All right, so if we click create lobby and we get our lobbies, we go ahead and join. You can see we have both of us right here. And then if this guy, since we're only sending it on the client side, I'm going to show you only on the client side here. If they click ready, there we go. We have got socket message test. Awesome. So that's pretty much the majority of our work done. So now if we wanted to, we could actually create a small chat box. And I'm going to go ahead and do that. I think that would be really cool. So let's build a small chat box where you can type in some stuff and then we can end this tutorial here. And then we can move into a more in-depth tutorial on networking and creating a small networking library. So let's get to that. So I'll close this. And I'm going to come up to my control node, right click, add in a child node, and add in a control node, just like that. We'll make this about this big, give or take. We'll create a small little box. I think that will be perfect. And then we will add in a color rect. There we go. And we will go layout full rect. So it's full rect. And I'm going to change the color to black. That way, well, maybe like a dark gray, because you probably don't want black. That's probably not going to look very good. So we'll do a dark gray. And then we'll right click our control node, add in a child node, and let's type text and let's do a rich text label. And we will maximize that to full rect. We're going to pull this up just a tiny bit. And then we will right click our control node, add a child node, type in a line edit like that, and we will snap this to our bottom left. And we're just going to extend this out to about this big, give or take. And then we're going to do the same thing, right click, add a child node, add in another button, and we're going to make that snapped to the bottom right. There we go. And now we have a small little chat system. Now, if we come into our text, we can type send, and that will allow us to send ourselves some text. We can pull this guy over here. There we go. There we go. And we can come over to our button and we'll need to attach this to a script. Now we have one of two options. And honestly, I think I might come in here and name this chat box. And then we'll right click it, attach a script and make a chatbox.cs and click create. Now, if we come in here, we can actually create a function for our button. So we'll click on our button, on button down, connect it, and say on button, button down. That's fine. And we'll do the chat box like that. We'll copy this and connect it. We'll say private void on button, button down. And we will go ahead and create our message. So really what we want to do is we want to pass our user information over to the user and we want to send them a message. Okay. So the first question you might ask is, well, how can we do that? Right? Well, we will do it exactly the same way that we did with our scene manager and our ready button, right? We can just come in here and much like our ready button on our scene manager, we just grab our scene manager and send some text, right? but we also need to know the user that sent that data, right? We could send a data across and just have it, exist, but that doesn't work when you're not passing what player actually sent that data. So what we'll do is we're going to create a dictionary, and that dictionary is going to house a lot of that data. So we'll type dictionary, and you'll see that it's not coming up. So we'll click this guy using system.collection.generic, and we'll make it a type string, comma string, and we'll call it dict, and then we will say is equal to a new dictionary string, comma string. There we go. And what we'll do is we'll type dict dot add, and for our first value, we will say user ID, comma, and the string value will be Steam manager dot player name, and that will pass our player name. And then we also need to tell it what is our user, or what is our data type. Okay, and this is me building this for the future, but we need to know what type of data we have. So dict.add, and we'll just put data type like that, comma, and we can just pass in chat message like that. And then we need to tell it what our message is. So we'll say dict.add message, and actually I should probably capitalize user since I'm doing that for everybody, comma, and then what our message is going to be, which in our case is get node line edit, and we'll pass in what we're trying to get for our node path. So if we take a look at our node path, it is just called line edit. So we'll grab that guy, we'll paste that guy in there, dot text, and that will pass back that data. And now we need to convert that data from a dictionary to text, okay? Because we want to pass it in here as text. So how can we do that? Well, that is where Newtonsoft.json works. We can convert this data into a JSON data set. And how we do that is we come up to our terminal, we type or hit new terminal, and then we can type .NET add package newtonsoft.json. Now you need to make sure that you have .NET installed. If you don't have .NET installed, then this is going to be borderline useless to you. So you'll need to find a different way, like downloading the DLL directly and then referencing it, kind of like we did with this face punch Steamworks. But in this case, we can just do that. And now I can come in here and type using newtonsoft.json. And there we go. We have that library in our project. And it's really that simple. It takes 2 seconds to throw Newtonsoft into here. So now we can just type string JSON is equal to JSON convert dot serialize object, and we can just pass in our dictionary. That simple. And then we can just pass our JSON like that. And now out in our Steam socket manager, when we take this data, we can parse it as JSON data because we know it's JSON data, right? So we can just come in here, and instead of doing var string dot get string manage array, which is perfect, now we're going to need to deserialize this dictionary. So if we come in here and we type system.collections.generic.dictionary string, comma string, and I know what you're saying, right? Why would I do system.collections.generic dictionary, right? And that's because Godot actually has its own dictionary, and since we're not using that, we want to define our own. And we'll say dict, and we'll type JSON convert dot deserialize object, and make sure we hit these little brackets here, and we'll say as a system.collections.generic.dictionary string, comma string, just like that. We'll close this, and our string value is going to be the str, and that should do it for us. And as long as we can pass in our data here. So instead of saying got socket message str, we can just say dict quote, and I believe it's, what was it? User ID. So we'll pass that in, and plus dict, and I believe it was message, if I remember correctly. Let me see. Yes. And also make sure that this has quotes around it. Something that I've noticed was that data type may not have quotes around it, so we'll want to make sure that we have that as well. So that should work, and make sure that we got rid of that colon. I don't know why that colon was there, but make sure that we have it looking like that, and come over here, save this guy, and I'm going to copy this guy over to our other machine, and we can test this. All right, so if I hit create lobby and I click get lobbies and I join a lobby like that, and I type a message here, and then I hit send, got socket message, find point CGI, DF, whatever. Now, if I type this and I hit send, you'll see got socket message me, right? The stuff that I sent. But unfortunately, we don't actually send our socket message to our other user. So we're going to need to make sure that we have that capability. So what we can do, because now we have all of our data, we really just have to hook it up to here and then make it so that we relay our data across, right? So if we close this, we come over to our code here, and we go over to our chat box. What we should do is we should check if we are host. And if we are host, then we don't want to send a message to a socket, right? We just want to send a message to the people below us, right? So if we can come in here and we can just check if we're host. So Steam manager.manager.is host. If we are host, then we want to broadcast our message. Now, we don't actually have code for that yet, but we can say else. If we're not manager, then we can just go ahead and send our message like normal. If we're not a host, then we can just send it. But if we are host, we're going to need to relay all of that code and all of those messages. So that's where our Steam Manager is going to come in handy. So let's open up our Steam Manager, and we'll scroll down, I don't know, somewhere in here, and we'll type public void broadcast, and we'll pass in our string data, and we will broadcast that data to all of our different socket connections. Now, one of the things about this is that we have to manually say, okay, loop through all of your connections. And that's where the socket manager comes in. The socket manager actually houses all of those connections right there. So we can say for each var item in Steam socket, it's not coming up, so I'm going to grab it right here, Steam socket manager. I don't know why it's not coming up, but Steam socket manager dot, and we can say connected, and we want to not send ourselves the data. I mean, we could if we wanted to, and it's not going to break anything, but basically the way this works is this is an array of connections, okay? So these are array of basically IP addresses. And when we send our data, 0 is always us, and then everybody else is past 0, if that makes sense. So if I were to send you data, I would send data to me and then to you. So we kind of want to skip that. So we can just go dot skip, and you'll see that we're not getting any auto completion, and that's because we're missing link. So if we click on this guy, go here using system.link, skip the first element in the array, dot to array, and that will actually pass us back an array of objects that we can loop through. Okay, and then we can pass it that data. So we can just say item dot send message and pass in that string, so that data. And there we go. That should rebroadcast our data if we are the host. So if we come over to our multiplayer, so if we come up to our chat box and we just say Steam manager.manager.broadcast, we can pass in our JSON data. There we go. So now if we test this and see if this works, hopefully it will, but you know, as with code, nothing ever works the first time. So we'll try it. We can create a lobby, get our lobbies, join a lobby, and then I can send a message and send it to me. And you can see, got a socket message, find point CGI, blah, 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 blah. And then if I type this out and I send a message, I got a socket message from myself, but I didn't get a socket message from my actual, I didn't get a socket message to my actual client. So let's see what is wrong. I wonder if that skip one is actually breaking it. I thought I would need it because it's an array of me, but I'm already getting the data to me. So I'm curious if I'm actually skipping myself by accident. Maybe I got it wrong. So let's take a look. Let's grab this, get rid of it real quick. Let's save that. Let's try it again. So we'll create a lobby. We'll get our lobbies. We'll join it. And then let me attempt sending a message. Nope, it didn't send the message. So that means something's broken on the client side. And I'm going to have to do some debugging. So I guess I'm going to be right back and I'll let you guys know what in the world is going on. See, that's a problem right there. So I'm not, for some reason, is host is false. Am I not setting is host? So I think the reason why we're having problems, I think I'm not setting host equal to true. So let's come up here, is host, Control F. Nope. I'm not setting is host equal to true. So that is totally my fault. So what we'll do is we'll say is host is equal to true. And we want to make sure that we have it under our create Steam socket server, or at least somewhere where we know that we're going to be a host. And that is my fault. So let's hit Control S and let's completely try this again. We'll close this guy, disconnect. We'll close on our client side as well, and we'll hit play. We will create a lobby, we will get our lobbies, we will join, and then I'm going to type some words, hit send, and you'll see that over here, they got the message. They got a message. They didn't quite get the message, right? So they didn't get the message that we were looking for, but the reason why is because we are not parsing the data in our Steam out in our Steam connection manager. We're just saying got a message. So that's the reason why. And that kind of underscores a little bit of what I was telling you guys earlier, where you have the Steam connection manager and then you have the Steam socket manager. They're two totally different worlds. So what you're going to want to do, or what we need to do, is we need to take this data and we need to abstract it out somewhere. So we can either throw it in our Steam manager or a network manager or something like that, but it's a good idea to actually abstract this out into its own function that both sides can call and can use. So what I will do is in my Steam, I'm going to right click and create a new file. I'm going to call it data parser.cs, and I will basically just grab this little bit here and then we will paste it into our data parser. I'm going to get rid of my inherit and I'm just going to change this to data parser. Like that. And we'll get rid of our Godot reference. We don't really need it. And we'll add in a using system.collections.generic because we need to do that dictionary return. And we'll say public static dictionary of string, comma, string. And we'll just say parse data like that. And we'll pass in, I think we'll need to pass in our inner pointer data. So we'll just pass in inner pointer data. And I think we'll need our size, and that should about do it. Yeah, so that should about do it. So we'll grab these two guys. We'll need our interpointer data and our size. We'll put those guys in there, and then we can just abstract this out. So we can just grab this guy right here, cut it, come in here, paste it, and that should about do it. I don't need this GD print. I probably should have left it here. And that should do it. And then we could just return our dictionary. And there we go. And if we want to make this a little bit, prettier, I guess we could technically return this right here instead of returning a dictionary, but I mean that's more dealer's choice than anything. But there we go. And then we can come into our socket manager and we can say system.collections.generic dict is equal to data parser dot parse data, and we can pass in our data comma our size, and that will basically just handle it for us. And that basically allows us to do what we need it to do. And I mistaked this, so dot dictionary string comma string, and that's my fault as well. And that basically will handle it for us, right? We can just pass in the data and we're good to go. And now we can literally just copy this, right? And come into our connection manager. And then instead of you got a message, we can just paste that in and we have the exact same code in two separate spots that is not wasting our time, right? And that's the big thing that we want to, make sure is that we don't waste code, right? Now, the last thing that I want to do is I want to show how we can actually get the data onto our screen. And then we should be good to go to basically call it, unless we really want to talk about how to clear your lobby or how to do things like that. But it's really up to how things go. I mean, I think I'm at like 4 hours worth of recording, so we'll kind of see. But if we want to send out our data, what I would suggest is if we go into our data parser and we have a small section here where we kind of check and parse our data. So personally, what I would do is I would say public static void process data and pass in the interpointer data like we already have here, like this. And then what we can do is we can fire off an event, okay? And we need to know what type of data we're going to be firing off this event for, right? So what we can do is we can create an event. So if you remember how we created an event, we did a public static event and we did an action, right? And we need to pass back some data. So we can pass back our, dictionary string comma string, right? Just like that. And we can just call this on chat message like that. Then we can come down here and say, okay, let's first parse our data. So var dict is equal to parse data comma size like that. And then unlike before with our socket managers, okay, with these guys where they're just printing the data, instead let's jump into the data and let's take a look at it and see where it needs to go. So we can basically just check what this dictionary is, and then we know what type of event to raise, okay? So we can just do switch on our dict data type, and we can type case it is, and if we look at our chat box, chat message right here, if it is a chat message, right, we've parsed our data, we're checking our data type. If it is a chat message, then fire off our on chat message. So we could type on chat message.invoke and just pass in our dictionary. And that will pass our data and be good to go. And we could just, in our default type break, there we go. And basically that allows us to know what type of event to raise. So for instance, if we are, sending out a ready signal, right, which we'll be doing in our next tutorial or our next, segment of this tutorial, when you hit this, you can just say case ready message. And then if it's a ready message, you can fire off a ready message to the rest of your code and let your code know that it's a ready message, if that makes sense. So now I can just come in here, and instead of doing our parse data, where we're doing our socket manager parse data, we can instead just say process data, data parser dot process data, and we can get rid of that little guy there. And we can do the same exact thing in our socket manager, which is right here, our little connection manager. We can paste that guy in there, and that will basically allow us to process our data, right? Parse it, and then send out, if it is a data type that we recognize, we can send it out to the rest of our code. And since we're invoking this little chat message, we can actually come over to our chat box, and we can just on ready go data parser dot on chat message plus equals. And as you know, with the rest of my code, I'm just going to say on chat message callback like that. We can copy this, come down here and say private void on chat message callback, and it passes in the data that we would expect, which in this case is a dictionary of type string, comma, string. And we can just say data like that. And now, since we have all of this data, we can actually apply it to our chat message box. So we can just say get node, and I believe it's a rich text label. And our rich text label, if I remember correctly, and I probably should change the name to be honest. Whoops, wrong one. To chat box, and I can just grab that, and we can go back here. Chat box dot text is equal to, and we'll need to append it to our data. So we'll just grab this guy, chatbox dot text plus. We'll need to carriage return, right? We need to actually create a new line, right? We don't want to append it onto the side, because if we do, then you'd have like player, data, player, data, right? And you don't want that, right? You're going to want to carriage return it, so that way it kind of works as like a chat, right? So what we can do is we can just say system.environment.new line plus data, and we need to pull back our actual user ID. So we'll say user ID, and we need to pass back our user ID. So we'll say user ID plus quote semicolon space plus data quote message, and that will basically do it for us. Now let me launch this over to the other side. We can test this, and then hopefully we'll be pretty much done with this segment of the tutorial, and then we can continue into actually making some gameplay elements. So I'm going to be right back. All right, so if I create a lobby and I get my lobbies and then I join a lobby, if I send a message and I send it to you, you can see right there. And if I send a message back, you will see that it shows up on the other side. Now you will notice that there's a slight bug, and that is that it's not showing up on the other side when this guy sends a message. You can see it's showing up here, but not here. And that is because we are not invoking our code to actually show it to the player when we're sending a message. Because we're broadcasting, right? It is saying, hey, I'm sending it to myself, right? But it's not updating our chat box, and we need to update our chat box. So if you remember when we went to our socket, our Steam manager, and we did that skip one, that's the reason why we're not missing it on our backend, right? Why we're not actually receiving it on our server, right? When our server sends a message, it's sending it to itself, and we forgot to re-add that skip. So let's find that real quick. So we'll come in here and say .skip, and we'll pass in skip one. So that way it skips myself. And then we need to actually tell us to send ourselves that message. So we can just call on chat message callback right here and pass in our dictionary. There we go. And that will basically just append it to our local data, right? And now if I resend all this across, and I'll be right back, you will see that it should in theory work. All right, now if I create my lobby, I get my lobbies, I join, and I come in here, I type a couple of message, I hit send, it'll show up right here, and it shows up right here. If I send a message, it shows up right here and it shows up right here. Awesome. So that's basically how we can send data and do our lobby connection. It's basically the minimum you need to get going. Now, in the next video, we're going to talk about how to actually make some gameplay elements. And I know that this is a lot of information and, you know, there's a lot to pour over here. So if you guys have questions, leave them in the comments below and I'm happy to help you out. But that is all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much again for watching and I'll see you all next time. Thanks.